Commissioners, we're going to start up with the item for proposed rulemaking under the City Administrative Procedures Act Commissioner briefing. Omnibus rules amendments, proposed amendments to Chapter 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11 of Title 63, the Rules of the City of New York, consisting of amendments, consolidation, and reorganization of existing rules and new rules, including in Chapter 2, amendments to Section 211 through 2-35, new rules concerning barrier-free access, sidewalks, and excavation. In Chapter 3, repeal of the chapter and its reorganization as amended into Chapter 2. In Chapter 5, amendments to Sections 5-01 through 5-03 and new Section 5-04. In Chapter 7, amendments to Sections 7-01 through 7-06, and in Chapter 11, amendments to Sections 11-01 through 11-06.
Thank you, Commissioners. Mark Silberman and Corey presenting to you today the briefing on the proposed amendments to the LPC rules. I'm going to say a few introductory comments, and Corey will take you through the major provisions of the proposal. And the proposed amendments, as we've discussed before, to the rules have a number of goals, which I'll discuss in a minute, but basically and fundamentally, we want our rules to be efficient in terms of cost and time. We want to be transparent. We want applicants and neighbors to understand what and how we do things and what the staff does. And if we're successful in that, in making our regulatory process efficient and transparent, we believe we'll be doing our best to ensure support for preservation citywide. The proposed rules can be grouped into four broad categories. Changes to the organization of Title 63, codifying various staff practices to ensure that staff use a consistent set of criteria and that applicants have a better understanding of what they need to submit to obtain a staff level approval. Codification of certain commission level decisions, and finally some more technical administrative amendments. At the most basic level, some of the proposed changes are designed to make our rules more user-friendly and intuitive by consolidating some rules and reorganizing the various work types so that related work is grouped together for ease of use and reference. This slide depicts the proposed revised table of contents of Chapter 2 of Title 63, showing, for example, storefronts combined with awnings next to the signage rule. Additions and excavations are adjacent to each other. We believe this will just help, in general, people navigate the rules. Right now, they're very scattershot, and there's no logic to how they're organized. Codification of long-time staff practices is a critical goal of the proposed rules. This slide briefly describes the work types that fall into this category. Restoration is a great example. For decades, the staff has approved applications to repair and restore historic buildings and materials and discrete architectural features. Notwithstanding, there's no explicit rule other than for brownstone and sandstone replacement. The proposed rule, which Corey will discuss, codifies the staff's knowledge and experience to ensure staff consistently reviews applications with the same criteria. This will also help applicants complete applications more quickly since they will know in advance what's needed to obtain a staff approval. As you can see, this list reflects a practical approach to approving work types that have no significant effect on architectural features. Menu boxes, rear decks, replacement doors, excavation for elevator pits, security bars on parlor floor windows, replacements of fire escape ladders with different ladder types. These are the kinds of things that staff approvals that we're going to be codifying in the proposed rules. The third goal is to delegate to the staff the authority to approve certain types of work that the Commission routinely approves using established criteria. Delegation will make review and approval of these work types more efficient and economical. Delegation will also serve to preserve the capacity of the public hearing calendar to absorb more applications in the future as the number of designated buildings increases. Finally, there are a handful of technical administrative amendments. The chapters on the Historic Preservation Grant Program and administrative enforcement have some procedural and technical amendments. There are more substantive amendments proposed for Chapter 3 of Chapter 7, permit renewal, duration, renewal, and revocation. This presentation today will focus primarily on this third goal, those amendments that would delegate work from the commission to the staff. I have previously circulated a memorandum outlining the codification of staff work, but we will be touching on that intermittently today. Finally, with respect to administrative changes, we will focus on the proposed amendments to permit duration and renewal in Chapter 7. I'll now turn it over to Corey.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Before starting, we would like to ask that you take notes and hold any questions until the end of the presentation to make sure that we stay on schedule. The first section is temporary installations. This codifies the existing staff practice that only one approval can be made for temporary installation with no renewals or extensions. The commission determination delegated to staff extends the amount of time the sign is installed from 60 days to 180 days to reflect the longer periods of time typically required for these signs to serve their purposes. The next section is restoration of building facades. It combines existing sections that include only sandstone restoration and restoration of missing facade features and greatly expands upon this limited content to become a general section that covers all types of restoration work. The vast majority of this comprehensive rule codifies long-standing staff criteria for the repair, restoration, replacement, and recreation of facades and features, including virtually all materials and some specific treatments, as well as existing staff criteria for the reconstruction of secondary facades and use of most substitute materials. In general, substitute materials can only be used at or below the second floor if limited to small quantities and occurring at discrete locations. Above the second floor more liberally for certain materials and building types, and most liberally at the 7th floor and above and throughout secondary facades, if indiscernible or otherwise not detracting. Finally, substitute materials cannot be used at a building seeking or subject to a special permit, MOU, unless the original material is no longer commercially available and replacement in kind is not possible. Again, this section primarily codifies existing staff practices used every day to issue staff-level permits. A commission determination to be delegated to staff includes the reconstruction of primary facades at buildings in historic districts. This is intended to capture those occasions when the primary facade must be taken down due to structural issues or material failure and is in the interest of public safety to do so. In some cases, the engineers and/or DOB may determine that the work needs to be done very quickly. Timing is critical, and saving weeks or months of review navigating the public hearing process can lessen the risks of inaction or taking temporary measures. For these applications, the applicant must provide the staff with a structural conditions report from a professional engineer, an assessment of the existing materials and features and potential for salvage and reuse, and fully dimensioned survey drawings of the facade. Existing modified features such as shaved lintels or sills must be recreated as part of the reconstruction unless part of a significant later alteration. Finally, I note that reconstructions of primary facades at individual landmarks will not qualify for staff-level approval. Other commission determinations to be delegated to staff include using substitute materials for wood siding and for historic roofing, where unlike other staff approvals for substitute materials, the whole facade or roof materials are all being replaced at once. For siding, painted fiber cement or hardy plank type clapboards with matching dimensions will be approved instead of wood if non-combustible siding materials are required by code. The photo on the bottom left shows a building in a historic district with fiber cement siding installed. For roofing, deteriorated historic roofing such as slate can be replaced with a substitute roofing material such as synthetic slate if the location of the roofing material is such that it is indiscernible from public view. This will generally apply to installations on taller buildings or where its presence is not prominent, such as on a dormer above a secondary facade. The photo on the bottom right shows an example of historic slate roofing on a tall building, which would qualify for substitute roofing if replacement was merited. The next section is storefronts and awnings. The rule combines the existing awning sections and parts of the existing rule that allows prototype storefronts that are not strictly restorative, and it maintains the existing criteria for most awning and storefront installations. The amended rule will will codify existing staff criteria for installing interior partitions behind display windows and frosted privacy films on display windows. Another codification of staff practices involves replacing service entrance infill, such as shaftway doors, based on prototypes or with a storefront instead. Lastly, the rule codifies staff criteria for the installation of sidewalk canopies at historic hotels, clubs, and large apartment buildings in historic districts where there is precedent for them. There are several commission determinations to be delegated to staff, including installing cafe fronts at display windows that open to the outdoors seasonally, consisting of doors or operable windows over bulkheads at new or non-historic storefronts. These operable windows and doors maintain a historic look when closed, but can open seasonally. They must include mullions, piers, some fixed display windows, or a combination of these elements to avoid creating a void, the appearance of an unusually large void at the base of the building. The top photo is an example of a cafe front in the closed position with two sets of operable doors designed with tall base panels and separated by piers. The rule will also permit an operable pass-through window to allow sales to customers on the sidewalk. Other commission determinations to be delegated to staff include creating a new door opening and plain wall cladding adjacent to an existing display window with criteria to ensure compatibility with the display window and the building. This can be seen in the bottom left photo. For no-style buildings, new storefronts can be wood or metal, regardless of the age of the building, provided the design and finish is consistent with the look of the building or with storefronts in the historic district. Lastly, the installation of fixed awnings at individual landmarks will be delegated to the staff. The criteria for these installations are stricter than for buildings in historic districts with regard to framing and attachments to ensure that they better recall historic retractable awning installations. The photo on the bottom right shows a fixed awning that meets the criteria with tubular lean-to framing and a loose skirt. The next section is signage. In addition to renaming the signage rule, it relocates the rule to be adjacent to storefronts for ease of use. The rule is relatively unchanged except for the addition of several sign types and illumination options. The amended rule codifies existing staff criteria for small plaques attached to plain walls at buildings with storefronts or professional offices, and menu boxes attached to plain walls or infill at storefronts with restaurants. Regarding signs, there are several commission determinations to be delegated to staff, including installing dimensional letters on narrow channels that span storefront transoms, as seen in the top photo, and installing small sign panels on plain masonry or railings at stairwells at below-grade storefronts. Plaques can be installed on metal posts and areaways, and poster boxes can be installed on facades of buildings used as theaters, religious institutions, community centers, museums, and other buildings that traditionally have them. Other commission determinations delegated to staff address illumination. Halo lighting will be permitted behind opaque lettering at sign bands and sign panels as an alternative to using gooseneck light fixtures or light troughs, which are currently allowed. And finally, small spotlights or integrated lighting will be permitted at armatures of bracket signs, as seen in the two photos at the bottom right. Lastly, staff will continue to limit the total amount of signage based on the cumulative impact of existing, approved, and proposed signage. Staff will not approve new signage that will result in a storefront having all four types: signage on an awning, at the sign band, on the display window, and at a bracket sign. The next section is windows and doors. It relocates and combines the existing window chapter and the rule for new window openings and expands to include doors for the first time. The proposed rule reclassifies special windows, for which most types have not changed at all, into 5 categories, including rare shapes and patterns, distinctive glazing, fine craftsmanship and distinctive materials, unique typology, and age, which is entirely new and includes all windows installed prior to 1850, regardless of type. It also refines the definition by removing simple arch-headed windows, common French doors, and windows and bays and oriels for which the sashes themselves are not special. The photos on the top show a simple arched window no longer defined as special for the purposes of the rules. In this case, the opening on the facade is arched, but the interior wall opening and upper sash of the window is actually square-headed with arched paneling. This type of window can now be replaced with a different material, as improvements in fabrication over the years will ensure a good match. Windows like those seen in the lower left photo, in this case with bowed sashes and some with elaborate mutton patterns, would remain special windows. The rule generally maintains and follows existing criteria for window replacement at primary facades, and it codifies additional staff practices such as replacing windows that historically pivoted with casement or tilt-in windows with a similar orientation. The rule codifies staff criteria for door replacement, which requires that new doors match or recall the historic doors, except for special doors which must be replaced in kind. Lastly, it codifies replacing non-historic entrance infill, consisting of the side lights, transoms, spandrels, and framing in addition to the door itself, based on historic prototypes and not necessarily matching the historic condition if no historic fabric remains. With regard to windows, there are several commission determinations to be delegated to the staff in this section. The following are commission determinations delegated to staff that involve window installations at primary facades. These are exceptions to matching the original material, operation, and configuration. The rule will delegate approval of aluminum or fiberglass windows at small buildings if the original windows were simple arch-headed 1/1 double hung and not multi-light, in keeping with the same provision that currently exists for straight-headed windows of a similar configuration. In addition, for both straight and arch-headed windows, the brick mold can also be replaced with an alternate material so long as it matches the historic profile. Similarly, because simple arch windows will no longer be considered special, aluminum and fiberglass will be permitted for these windows in any common multi-light configuration at large buildings. The photo at the top left shows the quality, details, and finish of a modern aluminum-clad arched window in this case. Operation changes will also be delegated to the staff, including using single-hung windows with fixed upper sashes or simulated double-hung windows with fixed upper sashes and tilt-in lower sashes, instead of traditional double-hung windows. The photo at the top right shows a high-performance simulated double-hung window with the lower sash tilted inwards, generally used for projects attempting to meet passive house or very high energy standards. Additionally, operable transoms will be permitted to be made fixed or vice versa, and in cases where the transom was historically glazed with stained glass, but the stained glass was removed prior to designation, clear glass will be permitted. Most of these exceptions apply only to buildings in historic districts and not individual landmarks. Lastly, windows and doors in non-original openings, such as those created by the removal of a stoop, can match or harmonize with the historic windows on the facade rather than matching what was previously installed unless that was part of a significant later alteration. The bottom photos are an example where the non-special steel windows in the modified opening, seen at the left, was replaced with a double-hung window to match the remainder of the facade, seen at the right. The last slide in this section covers commission determinations delegated to the staff that involve window installations at secondary facades. The amended rule provides for the option of matching the historic configuration or using a simplified but period-appropriate configuration like 1/1 if there's no predominant historic window configuration on the facade. This applies to visible secondary facades of large buildings in historic districts, such as the building shown in the top photo, but not on small buildings or on individual landmarks. Similarly, facades on these large buildings that had all of their windows replaced with non-historic configurations, including single light picture windows, can match the existing or predominant window if limited to 10% or less at the same time. This will allow an individual apartment to replace windows without disrupting an otherwise unified facade. Commission determinations delegated to staff at rear facades of row houses permit changes to window and door openings, including if minimally visible from a public thoroughfare, such as the example in the photo at the bottom left. Double height combinations of openings can be installed at the lowest two floors if at least 24 inches of masonry is retained at the lot line sides and a 12-inch spandrel is used between floors. The window and door assemblies must also be subdivided with mullions or muntins and cannot be just a monolithic sheet of glass. At upper floors, windows can be combined and enlarged if masonry is retained at the outer piers and at least 18 inches of masonry is retained above and below the opening, and one window per floor is not combined. Top floor windows cannot be combined or enlarged except for one opening to provide for a door as per the current rule. The next section is additions. It combines the existing rooftop additions and rear yard addition rules into one section. Rooftop HVAC equipment, which is part of the current rooftop addition rule, is being relocated to the HVAC section. The proposed rule amends the definition of minimally visible. The current definition describes it as any rooftop addition viewed from a public thoroughfare projects into the maximum line of sight 12 inches in height or less, or due to its placement and size does not call attention to itself nor detract from any significant architectural features. In practice, staff has applied the 12-inch standard to visibility over primary facades, and that standard, or the more contextual standard, to visibility over secondary facades. The amendment to the definition is intended to reflect commission approvals for visibility of both rooftop and rear yard additions. It would permit slightly more visibility the taller the building, specifically 12 inches if the addition is built less than 60 feet above the ground, 24 inches if built between 60 and 100 feet tall, and 36 inches if more than 100 feet tall. And the second aspect of the definition, that an addition not detract from any significant architectural features or call undue attention to itself, would be determined in relation to specific factors routinely used by the commissioners, such as the distance it is seen, whether it is seen from limited vantage points or an oblique angle, or is visible in combination with other rooftop additions or structures. The photo on this slide shows examples of contextual minimal visibility, where the additions are seen in great distances and/or from gaps in the street wall. For the most part, the amended rule maintains and follows the existing criteria for constructing rooftop and rear yard additions. It also codifies existing staff practices with regard to installing decks in rear yards and raising flue extensions, including those that are visible from a public thoroughfare if other decks or rear yard incursions and other flues or rooftop accretions are visible in the surrounding context. There are several commission determinations to be delegated to the staff in this section addressing rooftop additions, rear yard additions, and combinations of both. The following are commission determinations delegated to staff that involve rooftop additions. With respect to occupiable additions, rooftop additions can be minimally visible over secondary facades using the height limits or the contextual factors previously described to make that determination. The photo on the top right is an example of a minimally visible occupiable addition seen only for a few paces through a gap in the street wall and over a garage and with a large building in the background. Grandfathered rooftop additions that are already visible can be made slightly more visible, but only if the proposed design improves or mitigates the relationship of the addition to the building and the streetscape. Regarding non-occupiable rooftop additions, existing elevator bulkheads, which are already visible, could be made more than minimally visible if the extension is required to meet current code and is serving the same level, provided visible elevator bulkheads are characteristic of the historic district. The photo at the bottom right is an example of elevator bulkheads commonly seen directly above facades in historic districts like Soho and Tribeca, where it is often not possible to make them non or minimally visible due to their historic proximity to the facade. In addition, non-occupiable rooftop additions like bulkheads and railings can also be minimally visible at individual landmarks that are not in historic districts over the primary facade of greater than 60 feet in height, and minimally visible over secondary facades if not seen in connection with a distinguishing architectural feature and finished to blend with its surroundings. The photo on the bottom left is an example of a bulkhead seen over a secondary facade of an individual landmark not in a historic district. If it is in a historic district, individual landmarks will use the same criteria for visibility of non-occupiable rooftop additions over secondary facades as other buildings in historic districts. Lastly, minimally visible dormer additions, like the one seen in the photo at the bottom right, can be constructed on rear-facing slopes of pitched roofs of building types that had them historically, provided at least 24 inches of the original roof is maintained to both sides, and the highest point is at least 18 inches below the ridge line, and the design and materials are in keeping with historic dormers and harmonized with the facade. This slide covers commission determinations delegated to staff that involve rear yard additions, as well as combinations of rooftop and rear yard additions. Similar to the provisions previously described in rooftop additions, the proposed rule would delegate to staff the approval of rear yard additions that are minimally visible from a public thoroughfare, using contextual factors like distance, limited vantage points, and extreme angles to make the determination. The photo on the top is an example of a minimally visible rear yard addition. Grandfathered rear yard additions that are already visible can be made slightly more visible, but only if the proposed design improves or mitigates the relationship of the addition to the building and its surroundings. Other commission determinations delegated to staff include approving one-story, full-lot commercial additions in rear yards on short blocks that have other buildings historically used for commercial and retail uses, when on at least two of the property lines It will abut existing buildings, walls, or deep inner courts. The graphic on the bottom left shows an example of an addition in blue on a lot that will qualify because it is abutted on two sides, and an example in red on a lot that will not qualify because it does not abut any walls or courts in blue. Staff can approve additions of up to 2 stories above grade to fill in enclosed central or side courts to the lot lines. Lastly, staff can approve additions built below grade if set back at least 5 feet from the rear lot line, provided the existing grade of the rear yard is maintained within 18 inches and is suitable for vegetative ground cover. Finally, prior to 2012, buildings could have both rooftop and rear yard additions, with no height limit for rooftop additions and no height limit for rear yard additions as long as it was not full height, provided neither addition was visible from a public thoroughfare. As proposed, approval of new additions that result in a building having both rooftop and rear yard additions will be redelegated to staff, but only if the existing or new rear yard addition is 2 stories or less and not full height. Both additions must also satisfy the regular rule criteria for massing and visibility, including for rear yard additions that more than 50% of the buildings of a similar type in the block have existing rear yard additions of a comparable depth. The image on the bottom right shows a building with both a rooftop and rear yard addition in blue, which is limited to 2 stories, even though it is on a block where the predominant height of rear yard additions is 3 stories. And the red indicates what would be permitted here if there was no rooftop addition being proposed. Lastly, new aesthetic standards have been established for the design of all rear yard additions, whether visible or not, prohibiting materials like vinyl siding and exposed CMU, and requiring that the fenestration follow the criteria for size and articulation in the window rules. And then lastly, that the parapets be partially open where they face the central green space. The next section is excavation, an entirely new rule. As a reminder, prior to around 2003, all excavation work was approved under certificate of no effect by the staff on the theory that the work was not visible and because the work was subject to DOB requirements. After a few problem sites, staff started bringing major excavation work to the commission for review. This was scaled back somewhat in the last decade as DOB has been taking steps to enhance its oversight and review of excavation work, including the creation of an expert excavation unit and clarifying their monitoring requirements. So over the last several years, at the request of the commissioners, LPC staff resumed reviewing moderate scopes of excavation work. The rule codifies existing staff criteria for approving most excavation within the footprint of the building and in areaways and yards, including for structural repairs, elevator pits, lowering slabs, regrading or leveling in the yard, and introducing other miscellaneous features that do require some level of excavation. The commission determinations delegated to staff involve excavating for below-grade additions in yards, as was previously described in the last slide for rear yard additions. As mentioned, at least 5 feet of yard will need to remain unbuilt at the rear lot line, and the depth cannot exceed the lowest story of the building. The drawing on the bottom is an example of an excavation for an addition meeting both requirements. As such, this does not delegate to staff the construction of new subcellar floors below the current lowest floor. In most cases, the applicant will be required to submit a conditions report of the building to assess the condition of the building's facades and foundations, a pre-construction site survey, and a draft of Department of Building Supportive Excavation filing drawings. In addition, a monitoring plan consistent with DOB procedures will be required for facades of buildings that are 6 stories or less, which were built pre-1901, or constructed of wood, or with an unreinforced masonry foundation, or with foundations of stone or brick that are affected by or adjacent to the excavation. An application for more limited excavation work, typically when underpinning the foundation walls is not required, will not need to submit these additional materials. The next section is front, side, and rear yards, another new rule. It codifies existing staff criteria for approving fence and railing installations in yards and areaways, and handrails and railings at stairs and stoops based on prototypes found in the streetscape or the historic district in cases where the work is not restoring the historic condition. The photo on the bottom right is an example of a new railing installed on top of stoop cheek walls, which had no railings historically. This also includes existing staff criteria for things like garbage enclosures, hatches, and lampposts installed in areaways. Additionally, it codifies existing staff practices for approving driveways at freestanding houses in historic districts where driveways are common. The commission determinations delegated to staff include non-restorative installations in garden historic districts, including installing open metal fences no taller than 36 inches in rear and side yards at buildings in Sunnyside Gardens Historic District. In the Jackson Heights Historic District, staff can approve low brick retaining walls no taller than 5 brick horses and with no ironwork at the border of the sidewalk and the front yard at 1 and 2 family houses, and open metal fences no taller than 30 inches at the planting areas in front of large apartment buildings, such as can be seen in the photo at the bottom left. With regard to areaway work, commission determinations delegated to staff include modest alterations to paving, steps, and planted areas, such as excavating to enlarge stairwells and landings, and changing the grade to accommodate more accessible paths by raising or lowering the landing at the door opening below the stoop, and pushing the stairs closer to the front of the areaway. Planted areas can also be introduced or enlarged, but like the other alterations to areaways described before, the changes in materials used must be compatible with and consistent with the building, the streetscape, and the historic district. Lastly, accessory ramps of the sort not required for barrier-free access located in service alleys or side or rear yards of large buildings can be installed if obscured by masonry wall or ironwork, provided they generally blend in with the building. Barrier-free access is the next new rule section. Codification of existing staff practices include installing simple short ramps without railings and apron ramps at storefronts and other entrances at buildings of all types. It also includes modifying or replacing doors and trim work and installing related barrier-free access hardware to make entrances accessible. The photos show examples of each. There are several commission determinations to be delegated to staff in this section, addressing additional modifications to entrances and the installation of lifts and ramps with railings at buildings in historic districts. In all cases, applications for barrier-free access should take into consideration changes to interior spaces that may reduce grade changes at the entrance, which will lessen the level of impact of or eliminate the need for exterior changes. Where there is more than one acceptable approach for making a building or space accessible, staff will approve the proposal that will provide barrier-free access with the least impact on significant architectural features of the building. The following are commission determinations delegated to the staff that include modifications to entrances and barrier-free access lifts. Up to 3 steps can be removed at stone, concrete, or cast iron stairs to bring an entrance to grade. If the treads to be removed are cast iron with vault lights, 1 tread must be set flush with the entrance at grade. Upon removal of the steps, the entrance infill and surround at the door can be lowered, raised, or widened, but in all cases must maximize retention of historic fabric, and the design of the alterations must recall the historic condition. The photo on the top shows an example of a stone step remove and the threshold ramped to create an accessible entrance. With regard to lifts, commission determinations delegated to staff include wheelchair platform lifts and chair lifts on rails, both of which are reversible installations. The installation of wheelchair platform lifts must avoid significant alterations to historic fabric, but minimal historic fabric can be removed to access the lift, such as removing a small area of curbing or fencing. The platform lift must be obscured or partially obscured by existing features, such as ironwork or masonry walls, typically in an areaway, be stored in the down position, and be finished to match the adjacent materials or otherwise neutral in color. The photo on the bottom left is an example of a platform lift in a row house areaway. The installation of chairlifts on rails must avoid significant alterations to historic fabric and attach to non-decorative elements whenever possible, and be finished to match adjacent materials or otherwise neutral in color. The photo on the bottom right is also an example of a chairlift on rails. In addition, grandfathered or commission-approved lifts can be modified or replaced to meet current code requirements. This includes enclosing them if required, reducing the size and improving hardware whenever possible, and matching the existing materials or finishes, or changing them to better blend in with the adjacent facade material. The next slide consists of commission determinations delegated to staff involving ramps. In all cases, the installation of the ramp must avoid significant alterations to historic fabric and not eliminate or conceal any significant architectural features. Ramps must be as short as possible unless staff determines that a longer ramp will have less visual impact on the facade. And in either case, no switchbacks are allowed. Ramps at storefronts must be confined to the entrance or building being made accessible and should not overlap adjacent buildings, even if under the same ownership. The photo on the bottom left is an example. Ramps and areaways must be obscured or partially obscured by existing features such as ironwork or masonry walls whenever possible, such as the installation seen in the bottom right photo. And ramps in deeply recessed courtyards or areaways must generally be located within the recess and not at the sidewalk, typically off to one side to be as inconspicuous as possible. All ramps and handrails must be simply designed and built using materials that match the adjacent facade or sidewalk materials and ironwork, or with neutral utilitarian materials and finishes, whichever will have the least obtrusive presence on the building. The photo on the top shows a ramp with a stone base to match the base of the building with a simple black painted metal handrail. In other cases, concrete or diamond plate may be more appropriate. Lastly, grandfathered or commission-approved ramps can be modified or replaced to meet current code requirements, made smaller or shorter if possible, and can match the existing materials or finishes, or be changed to better blend in with the adjacent facade or sidewalk materials. The next section is sidewalks, another new rule. Sidewalk work in districts that historically did not feature significant sidewalk paving, or where little or no historic or significant paving exists, will not require an LPC permit. Examples include the Upper East Side, Ridgewood, and Sunnyside Gardens historic districts. Work in all other historic districts will continue to require an LPC permit. Examples include the Upper East Side, include Greenwich Village, Brooklyn Heights, Dumbo, Soho Cast Iron, and Fieldston historic districts, among many others. These will all continue to require a permit, and they'll be listed, put on a list and appended to the rules. Future historic district designations will make this determination in their statement of regulatory intent. This section codifies existing staff criteria for repairing, resetting, and replacing stone paving in kind, replacing concrete paving in kind or with tinted concrete, depending on the surrounding sidewalk conditions. And it also codifies existing staff practices for repairing, resetting, and replacing cast iron vault lights in kind, and covering them with diamond plate if damaged or deteriorated to prevent water infiltration into the vault. Vault lights in protected areas like steps between columns and vertical risers on stairs are to be repaired and remain uncovered whenever feasible. There are several commission determinations to be delegated to staff in this section, addressing stone paving and cast iron vault lights. Commission determinations delegated to staff include that involve stone paving include removing crushed or otherwise unsalvageable bluestone flags. All bluestone paving in sound condition must be retained and consolidated on site, and the remainder can be replaced with new bluestone or tinted concrete to match. Removing limited pieces of bluestone paving to enlarge tree pits and reusing them elsewhere on the sidewalk whenever possible will also be delegated to staff. The photo on the top is an example of this common situation where the tree roots have uplifted and damaged surrounding bluestone. Additionally, monolithic granite vault cover slabs with integral curbs can be sliced or replaced in kind in conjunction with installing matching granite curbs, and granite or bluestone paving can be modified or relocated to facilitate making sidewalk intersections accessible. With regard to cast iron vault lights, commission determinations delegated to staff include removing up to 2 panels of deteriorated vault lights and installing new paving to match the surrounding sidewalk if the installation is on a block that is devoid of any other vault light installations. Additionally, highly deteriorated or broken vault lights that are currently covered with concrete or with diamond plate can be removed provided diamond plate is installed in its place. The 2 photos on the bottom show examples of deteriorated vault lights where unsafe conditions exist and water is free to enter the basement vault of the building. The next section is health, safety, and utility equipment. This section is also entirely new and codifies existing staff practices for reviewing a variety of equipment installed at the base of buildings related to health, safety, and utility maintenance, such as utility meters, fire alarm bells, as well as security installations like window bars, cameras, lighting, intercom panels, and conduit. In addition, criteria in this section will also be used for certain HVAC installations, including air intakes and exhausts at basements, cellar, or areaway windows and floors that must be installed at the base of the building, which supersedes the regular HVAC installation criteria that is based on building type or size. The next section is heating, venting, air conditioning, and other mechanical equipment. This rule relocates rooftop HVAC from the rooftop addition rule and combines it with the existing HVAC rule. To clarify, mechanical equipment is defined as equipment other than HVAC equipment, such as solar and wind power equipment, batteries and emergency generators, including any associated elements such as catwalk railings and sound attenuation structures. The codification of existing staff practices includes installing wall-mounted flues and ducts on visible and non-visible secondary facades, and permitting slightly larger and minimally projecting louvers and vents at secondary facades of all building types. A number of commission determinations delegated to staff are in this section, including installing projecting window AC units and painted filler panels in conjunction with partial height window sashes, or in place of a window sash, as seen in the top left photo. Additionally, flush-mounted architectural louvers can be installed in flat, plain areas of masonry, including natural or cast stone and terracotta, as opposed to only in plain brick, as seen in the photo at the top right. Wall-mounted mini-split units can be minimally visible at secondary facades, as seen in the bottom right photo, consistent with visibility currently allowed for other HVAC and mechanical installations at secondary facades. The installation should maximize reversibility and minimize damage from attachments, and all associated platforms, conduit, and hardware must be finished to blend with the surrounding materials or otherwise be neutral in appearance. HVAC and mechanical equipment can be installed in front yards and side yards if there's no practical or feasible alternative, and can be minimally visible when at least partially screened by features such as fences and mature plantings, and must be finished to blend with the surrounding materials or otherwise be neutral in appearance. Currently, rooftop HVAC and mechanical equipment can be minimally visible only above individual landmarks that are more than 6 stories in height. The amended rule will delegate approval of minimally visible rooftop equipment at individual landmarks of 6 stories or less if there is no other feasible location. Last section that I will go through is fire escapes, which will codify existing staff practices for swapping ladder types from drop ladder to swing stage and vice versa. Commission determinations delegated to staff include modifying landings horizontally or vertically to match the existing fire escape. Additionally, where the existing rule only allows for the removal of non-decorative fire escapes in certain historic districts, the amended rule also delegates approval of the installation of new fire escapes. New fire escapes must be installed on the least visible facade possible, but can ultimately be installed on the primary facade if required by the building code, provided that fire escapes are common installations in the particular historic district where the work is occurring, and the fire escape is simple and utilitarian in design. In all cases, the modification or new installation will not cause damage to any significant architectural features of the building. And in all cases, staff will consider whether the need for the fire escape on the primary facade is necessitated by recent or approved interior renovations. With that, Mark is going to finish today's presentation with some administrative slides.
Thank you, Corey. Expedited certificates of no effect are an important regulatory tool to ensure fast and efficient processing and issuing of permits for work that is purely interior. Applications that satisfy the criteria in the existing rule get a permit within 3 business days. About 8 to 10% of staff approvals are ex-kine, so they're very important regulatory type for us. Proposed amendments to Section 232 just adds to the type of work that is eligible for this expedited review. Work on the 2nd and 1st floor at buildings where there's no commercial use below the 2nd story will now qualify. Previously, you couldn't do that. You couldn't qualify for an ex-kine for work below the 2nd floor on the theory that there was commercial work, and therefore we didn't want to impinge on the commission's ability to do storefront work based on a previous staff approval for interior work. But that's overbroad, so now we're simply saying that where there's no commercial use below that 2nd story, that work will now qualify for a staff level ex-kine. Finally, the last part of the proposed rule amendments we're going to discuss today have to do with changes in Chapter 7, permit duration, renewal, and revocation. These changes reflect practical realities of performing work in New York. For projects seeking a special permit, for example, or a variance, it extends the duration of an LPC approval by 2 years to account for the process and time it takes to get a special permit or a variance at the Department of City Planning or the BSA. With respect to renewals, the process is being simplified. Owners will be able to apply for renewal up until the expiration date of the approval instead of having to apply 60 days prior to the expiration date. Instead of having to have a DOB permit in hand at that time for all of the LPC work, an owner can get a renewal if she has a permit for a substantial portion of the work. Work has begun, and she's in the process of getting a DOB permit for the remaining work. There is also a provision to allow the chair to reinstate a permit that has usually accidentally expired, providing the owner applies for reinstatement within 90 days of expiration. The work is ongoing and is expected to be completed within 36 months, and the chair determines it would be unreasonable to stop the project while the applicant seeks a new approval. The chair can reinstate the permit for no more than 3 years. And that is the end of our presentation to you